I'll just say one quick thing for Bruce. But for me, it's at the very beginning, I kind of sold or talked to Bruce about the fact we needed a place where the young people, one step forward, 2, 3, maybe even 4 steps back, and that they're still accepted and still the centre. I think it's that return and that re-engagement into something that they may have felt that they've broken or left, because with kids and young people in child, youth and family, they're leaving a lot more than kids who aren't working with child, youth and family. And
they're leaving what do you
they're leaving education, they're leaving groups, they're leaving families, they're leaving peers, and because they're broken down and they never return and don't have the opportunity to learn that skill around how to re-engage after you've done something dumb. And it's everyone needs to learn it, and I think here the young people have the opportunity to learn that, and once you've got that, it's a life skill. It's an important life skill. And Bruce and his team, you guys are amazing at that. And it's so that exclusion, that's it, you've blown your chances, don't come back, and then boom, 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 out into nothingness, doesn't occur here. So if we're talking about the young person at the centre of something, that is critical. And that affects huge change for the kids that we work with. And the ones that are now referring themselves, coming out of the community who aren't in school, not education, the invisible ones, who we may have known, but in the past, or have some sort of thing going on for them. And I think that's huge.
I recently attended a meeting where there were many school principals present, and they were looking at the issues of marginalised youth that were truanting. And even though I sat in for perhaps 4 hours, the whole approach was based on the young person had to make all the change. If you looked at the conversation, it was the young person had to make all the change and fit into the rules of the system. Often the rules that exclude actually become quite petty in the scheme of the big things happening in these young people's lives. And so I guess when I put a young person at the centre, I begin thinking now, I have to get to know them. I have to know who are they belonging to or not belonging to, what needs have not been met in their life which they're trying to meet in their own way. And can I design my approach to them based on a deeper understanding of what is happening for this young person? Can I get to help them develop their dreams, their vision for themselves? What are their hopes? All of which have usually got exterminated through life experiences up to the point that I've met them. But can I reawaken those things? And then can I design their education programs, their sense of developing their sense of belonging and attachment, but based on those particular needs. One young person recently came to me, and she, prompted by staff, she had identified that she wanted to do hip-hop dancing. She believed that she was good enough that one day she could go internationally and demonstrate her dancing. But she had no money, would I pay for her to go to a course? It wasn't a vast amount of money, so I would have said yes, but I was trying then to creatively work a way that she can pay the organisation back. And I came up with a way that she might be able to help in another part of our organisation. She might be able to work with, as a caregiver with our babies in our early childhood, or our teen parent learning hub. Now she's learning heaps about parenting. She's got a way that she's contributing. So in a way, it's an illustration of how she's developing an approach, developing a sense of generosity or her worth. She's contributing to the whole, but it's all arisen from programs and approaches developing from her being at the centre rather than me thinking she's got to just fit into the program that I and my staff have designed.
Mm. Mm. And I think the ways, there's opportunities when we talk about education and what's and our young people that are disengaged, or health, or any kind of system that they're sort of disengaged from, there are opportunities to support and encourage and get our kids where they need to be in lots and lots of different ways. Whether it is back into mainstream education, there's a couple of models out there that could be tweaked to where your guys and our guys can support these kids to return to education mainstream, or if it's too much water under the bridge and they've reached a certain age, supporting in a different way to get them to the same place. I think that's really, really important, because when we think about systems and things for the young people that we work with and the rules that they need to abide by, well, we need to remember that there are a lot of grown-ups in their world who haven't abided by the rules and they've been let down and betrayed. So trying to teach them a system on top of that kind of foundation is kind of tough. So getting it around it another way, I think, is opportunities here. And I think everyone should kind of think about opportunities in that way for our young people. And
I think one of the things that's excited me in recent months is that I've really captured the idea of the possibility of our young people being mentors, that they, those who are entering complex behaviour and getting more and more, moving on the path of getting more marginalised and excluded, they're looking up to champions in their community. If you can affect those champions, which we are beginning to do, because some of these young women, for example, have been in our programs for 18 months to 2 years, those older young people can be incredibly powerful mentors. And we can move from the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff stuff to really altering community attitudes at a community level. And so really developing a preventative approach. And I'm not sure quite where I'm going with this, but I really believe that's a future direction, that we can turn young people who others have said to be problems into community leaders.
And that links into a lot of work that we need to do around transitioning our young people who've grown up in care and things like that out into the community in a safe way, in a way that they've got a resource or a structure around them, being engaged in the community. I kind of do have a bit of a vision around, even though Child, Youth and Family is a statutory organisation, and we certainly have our role to play within the community, but we are also part of the community, and I think that way we can really get some good things happening out there.
So how could that look differently for young people? Who needs to be around that table in terms of transitioning?
Well, pretty much whoever the young person chooses, I think is really important. And the people, so hopefully, if everything's working well, it will be certainly a Child, Youth and Family representative or a social worker or something like that. But it's around who needs to be around the table. Well, lots of people. Community, like Bruce's team, my team, City Council, education, staff,
because often what we've done is at those key life moments, we're trying to get a planned approach to transition, thinking maybe as much as 18 months before they might move beyond legislative age that you're responsible for them as Child and Family, that we begin saying who's in their world. I guess we've been challenged by the contribution of Jackie Sanders in the research that actually young people will often make their own choices back to the people who have often let them down, but they'll move back to the people who have significance in their life.
Yep.
And so rather than fighting that, how can we ameliorate the risks and how can we acknowledge it and work with it? But I think that's been quite an important contribution from Jackie, because otherwise we can kind of easily get into the position of thinking we know best and we need to steer them away from certain people who have let them down in their lives. But actually we're not being grounded and realistic in our practice, and we need to acknowledge what the young person will do, like them to do, and how to equip them so they can make those relationships work.
That's it. Yeah. And when I say start, I mean youth services too. So other arms of MSC.
So whatever community you're in, So do you think in the past that our risk-averse approaches have kind of tried to eliminate some of those people in their networks rather than working with them? Because you were saying before about having a strengths approach. So what is different about that?
Well, they're not as invisible, and you're allowed to talk about what you actually want. I think that's very important. And in the mitigation around how that works and building the strengths and resources in the young person so that they can cope and manage. Just because they're in a strong place, maybe the people that, say, parents that they want to reconnect to aren't, and they still aren't able to give what, but having some resources that they can come back and check it out. The interesting thing about young people is they, at a certain age when they're transitioning out, you tend to see them when it isn't going right. And that's any young person, I think. You often don't hear from them if everything's great, but having the opportunity to come back into a place or an organisation when they don't have that family support or that connection.
I think we've done some important things that even though young people might leave our program, we've actually kept the door open.
Yeah, it's key.
So they pop in, they share with us, including through social media, what they're doing, so they have a sense that we're part of their world. When problems are arising, I think we've also had some quite good case consultations about how can we do things better. For example, we had a young man who was here for quite a lengthy period of time, and as he neared the age of 17, he became very anxious about his future. Some of his previous social supports who had been important to him fell away, and that resulted in quite disturbing behaviour. And so everybody was brought together to discuss how can we act in a coordinated and collaborative way, what resources needed to be put in place, how can we equip him, acknowledging where his natural pull was towards, that we could strengthen him. Sometimes it hasn't always worked. Other times I sometimes dare to think we're getting better at transitioning, because I know that there's a young person now in mainstream schooling who started with years away from established, from being engaged in formal education, and he is, as far as I know, touch wood, successfully engaging in work. As part of our transition, he comes here 2 afternoons a week still, and in fact he's been doing so well at school. We proposed that perhaps he didn't need to do this, but he very strongly made us aware that we were really important in him being able to successfully operate in the mainstream system, that he could come back and have this chill out time where he could share about what he was doing in that system, and and get a kind of a refill of the courage to keep working within that system. And that's enormous, because he really was a very socially disadvantaged young man. And for him now to be functioning well, holding his head high, not being bullied, is a remarkable achievement, which I think which is a really evidences this sense of collaborative practice, because it is the result of particularly Child, Youth and Family and ourselves working strongly together.
How did you get the school on board with that?
Wow.
Because our partners too, aren't they?
Yes.
Yes, indeed. There's a bit of advocacy from your part, Bruce, your team.
Yes.
You were part of the transition process. You went in and made the school aware of what could be available, instead of getting to a place where it wasn't working for him or the class or the school, that there would be some supports in place immediately.
I think one of my staff actually went and spent time. He went there last year just for visits, and a staff member would go along with him and sit in classes and just share in that. And in fact, this year one of my staff has gone and spent lunch hours and things like that, sort of touching base times to ensure that this was a supported transition.
So quite practical things.
Very practical, and it was the social kind of skills that are required to survive in a mainstream education when you don't have them. It's something that can
I think the other thing that would be part of this, and this shows something of this collaborative approach, is that my staff would have been cautious of whether this young man was going to be able to survive in mainstream education, whether the plan was too ambitious, and we didn't want him to have another failure experience. One of Donna's staff would have been a very strong advocate that she thought he was ready, and I think it's real evidence of the kind of relational approach that we have, that ultimately we said we should give this a go. We will support it. If things go wrong, then we'll support that as well. And I'm delighted being able to say Donna's staff member had the right line and challenged us. I love being challenged in my own thinking, especially when I'm the one that has had not enough hope for a young person.